It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the Phil Ferguson Show. It's very late August 2018. We finally have a little break from the heat. We're enjoying that and getting ready for the fall weather and the changing of the leaves. Very much looking forward to that this year. Later in this show, we were going to talk to Noah Lugeons. He is the creator and one of the cast members of Scathing Atheist, as well as a couple of other podcasts that we will talk about. And this was recorded a couple of days ago before Trump had his little pecker problem. So unfortunately, we don't get to have fun talking about that. But we're going to talk about the Catholic Church. We're going to talk about some economics. We're going to talk about his podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about our shared love for Donald Trump. So look forward to that. Of course, before we get into that, we've got a couple of investing skeptically topics. We're going to talk about if you get a lump sum offer, if you're leaving your job for retirement, instead of giving you an annual payment for a pension, they might offer you a lump sum of money. What should you do? So I run through some examples and ways to think about that. And something you're going to hear a lot lately is that the last 10 years of the stock market have been very hot, which they've done all right. They've done actually quite well. Is it now time to panic? So I compare what the 10-year return is versus the 11-year return, because in the end, every date range that we pick is arbitrary. So I arbitrarily picked 10 and I arbitrarily picked 11 to look at those numbers and see if they can help us any. I don't know that they will, but let's get into the show, and I hope you enjoy. I recently got an email from one of the listeners of the show, and thank you very much for sending me the email, asking about whether they should take a lump sum or monthly money from a pension. And in this case, I'm not going to say the person's name or where they're from or anything, because I'm going to use some of their actual numbers, just so it's a realistic example, because these are real numbers. They have the opportunity of taking $178,000 cash today, bam, pension pays out, or they can collect $1,200 as long as they live. So the question is, well, which one do you take? So a couple things I like to do is I like to understand the relationship of these numbers to each other and calculate percentages. That's what I do. So $178,000, that's the starting point, because that's real money. They're going to give you that money. It's not a game. It's not a trick. You don't have to survive. You don't have to live. You can die. You can spend it. You can keep it. It's yours. So that's the anchor point of everything that we examine around that. And then we look at $1,200 per month. That would be $14,400 a year. If you live a very long time, 20, 30 years, that $14,400 payout could eventually become more than $178,000. So that's something important to keep in mind. On the other hand, if you start collecting the pension and 3 months later you die, if it's a single life payment, the cash flow stops. You could get $4,800 because you only lived 4 months. And then the spouse you leave behind or the kids you leave behind, or if you just wanted the money to go to your estate and or charities, there's nothing there. Because when you die, the payments stop. Of course, this call can get very complicated, because often they have a thing where for a little bit lower rate, they'll give your spouse half the money when you die. Or for an even lower rate, they'll give your spouse 75% if you die. Or a slightly lower rate, it's on your life and or your spouse's life, so whoever lives longer. So they pay out slightly lower rate. In this case, I just stuck with the $14,400 per year. which would be something close to an 8% payout if you had the 178,000. So if you had 178,000, could you pull out 8% per year? Well, you could for a while. I mean, if the portfolio made 8% or more, you could pull out 8% per year and always get the 14,400 and keep the 178,000. That would be pretty freaking cool. It's kind of like having your cake and eating it too. But in retirement, you don't want to plan on making 8%. I generally think about 7%. And if you do better, that's awesome. So I recommend pulling out 5%. And of course, if you pull out 5% from 178,000, that's clearly, we move the decimal. It's 17,800 cut in half. So about $9,000, which is considerably less than the $14,000. So you have to think about what's better for you, to make 14,000 or to make 9,000. Keeping in mind, if you make only the 9,000, the 5% that you can pull out, you still get to keep the $178,000. So maybe you could take out a little bit more, and or you could have the 5% forever in perpetuity, even adding a 3% cost of living adjustment. The money is very likely to last in perpetuity. If the portfolio does do well, and it goes from 178 to 200 or 250, you could adjust your payout even more. So if you're really desperate and you need every dollar of the 14,400, especially if you're single and you have no kids, maybe taking the 14,400 is the optimal way to go. If you have a larger overall portfolio where you can take money out of, and the difference between 9,000 and 14,000 doesn't change your life in any way whatsoever, I'm taking 178, because that way there's no chance of me losing it. And just for reference, if you put that money half in stocks and half in bonds, you would expect to make something over 7 based on historical data. What happens in the short run could be very different, but in the long run, you should make around 7%. So that's the thought process. I always want to know the math and how it would affect, but you have to think about you. The things that might make the annual or monthly payments better would be if it's adjusted for inflation. So if every year it's indexed up, that would be a perk for taking the monthly payment instead of the cash. If it pays you 100% and your spouse 100%, that would be a perk for taking the money. Sometimes you'll get a pension where it says it'll pay you out, in this case, $1,200 per month. And then based on the age at your death, it may pay a residual amount out of $50,000 or $60,000. That would make the payouts way more favorable, because you could take the payments and still get a lump sum of cash. Just a reminder, that's not common. That's unusual. Usually it's some kind of payout or you take the lump sum. My general thought process for me, I really start with the default position of taking the lump sum. Taking the lump sum, investing it wisely, controlling it. And it's probably in part because I'm confident that I can do that. I'm confident that I can make better returns in the long run than what they're going to do, and that in the long run, I'll get more money, but it comes down to a personal decision. Another cutoff point is if the payout every year is 10% or higher, well, that starts to push the needle for me over towards taking the monthly payments. But it all depends on the math. It depends on your personal situation. It depends on your age and your health. All those things you have to think about. But if you ever get to the position where you've been at a job or you have an injury or some kind of settlement from some other source, and you really just want someone to help you walk through it, send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. I'll be happy to help. I understand that there's an incredibly small chance that you might actually hire me and I make money out of it. But if you don't hire me, that's okay too. I can be here to help. So send me that email if this is something that applies to you. Otherwise, keep this in mind if you are in a situation 5 or 10 years down the road and you have to make this decision. So that's a little bit about how to decide on a lump sum payout or monthly payments. I want to do a quick thing about the S&P 500 and 10-year historical returns. It's something that I've been waiting for, and you're going to hear a lot about it in the news, I'm sure, in the near future. If you look back at 10-year returns for the S&P 500, right now, they don't look that crazy. I mean, they look pretty good, 8-9%, depending on exactly when you start. But at the end of 2018, if you use the ending date of 12/31/2018, and you go all the way back to January 1st of 2009, that 10-year time period, you've gotten rid of all of the big drop from 2008. So you're starting kind of at the most recent bottom a decade ago, and it's been up, up, up since then. So the actual number, assuming 2018 has a total return of 10, I just picked that out of the air, just made it up, so it's not real at this point in time. Your average return for the last 10 years would be 14.7% or almost 15%. Now, the S&P 500 over decades and hundreds of years makes around 10. You can look on Wikipedia, S&P 500, and see that in the last 47 years, ending 12/31 of 17, the average return has been about 10.53, if I recall that from memory correctly. It's in that ballpark. So making almost 15% is considerably above the average. And that might scare some people and allow some people to make arguments that the market is too high of a price, too overvalued. So for fun, I wanted to look at what 11 years would be, because there's no magicalness in looking at 10-year history. Why don't we look at 11-year history? Probably because we have 10 fingers, but okay, let's look at 11. If you put 2008 back in and look from the end of 2018, again, assuming all of 2018 makes 10, all the way back to January 1st of 2008, 11 years total, the average return is 8.5%, which is below the long-term norm of around 10. So that would suggest that the market is not overvalued. It is so difficult to know when the market is overvalued and when it's not overvalued. And one of the things about long-term investing and almost always staying in the market is that you have to admit you don't know which way it's going to go. So stay in the stock market. Don't panic. Don't freak out. And if 4 months after I've done this recording, the market's down 25%, this will look like a stupid thing to say, and that might happen. But I know if you say year after year after year for the last 40, 50 years, stay in the market, stay in the market, stay in the market, you would have made a mountain of money. Market generally goes up. 8 out of 10 years go up. 10 out of the last 10 years have gone up. What's going to happen in the future? We don't know. If you're close to retirement or in retirement, make sure your cushion is the appropriate size for you personally, and just keep investing in the stock market. That's how you make the most money in the long run. So just keep your eye out for that. You'll see it pretty soon. People will start talking about the market making 15% per year for the last 10 years, which is probably going to be pretty close to accurate. But just keep in mind, it's a random time period, the last 10 years. Why not use 11? Why not use 15 or 20? So that's some information about the S&P 500 over the last 10 or 11 years. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are still listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. With me today, I have Noah Lugeons. How are you today, sir?
Doing all right, relatively speaking.
Fair enough. I'll take that. And I have to admit, I told you this before, but to my listeners, for the longest time, I thought your name was No Illusions, not Noah Lugeons.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody else ever had that, or is that just me?
Oh no, that's quite intentional. Yeah,
okay.
No, it happens quite a bit. No, when I first started my podcast, I was working for a toy company, and I was a kind of a public face of that company, so I couldn't have my real name associated with it.
I've seen your face. That was not a very smart toy company.
Yeah, well, it's out of business now. So
that explains a lot.
Yeah, your financial acumen, like they could have used you about 8-9 years ago, apparently. But yeah, I couldn't have my actual name associated with the show. I wanted to go with a pseudonym that would be a fairly obvious pseudonym. And it was kind of tricky because I had to come up with one for my wife that would match up with the last name. So, a disturbingly long amount of time went into settling on Noah Lugeons.
Well, that's kind of the thought process that went through my show naming, except for it was a few seconds and it was just the Phil Ferguson Show. So, other than those,
it could have been so much damn easier if it hadn't been for that toy company.
Yeah, other than those little differences, it was kind of the same process. Matter of fact, someone had said, other people have shows that have their names on it, like Rush Limbaugh, and I'm like, you're going to talk me out of this idea. That's not going to work. So you started a podcast, right? You started one, and that's the Scathing Atheist. Is that the first one, or was there something before this?
Yeah, no, that was our first foray into podcast.
Okay, so there wasn't a previous show that was like stillborn or anything.
No, well, actually, the Scathing Atheist was stillborn the first time around. About a year and a half, 2 years before we launched it, we recorded a few test episodes. I realized how much work this was going to be, and I was like, yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not. And then my wife kind of kick-started it again a few years later when she bought me a microphone, a MIDI player, a how to podcast book, and a very not so subtle message saying, like, maybe other people could listen to you bitch sometimes instead of just me.
Oh, that's nice. Make a show to bitch about how hard it is to make a show.
Well, oh yeah, there you go.
It's like Seinfeldian.
Yeah, right.
It's a show about nothing except for me bitching about how hard it. Although after the first 2 or 3 minutes, it would kind of get old, which I guess is your wife's point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fair enough. It's one of those things that I've spent 20, 25 years DJing, working with equipment, setting up sound in bars and restaurants and stuff. So when it came to buying some equipment to make a podcast, it was kind of almost embarrassingly easy until Skype updates. Then everything gets fucked up.
Well, I'll tell you what, I could not have been worse. Like I tell this story to people all the time when they're starting podcasts, that I could not have been worse educated in terms of starting a podcast when I decided to do this. I had no experience whatsoever recording sound. I knew nothing at all about microphones, mixers, editing software, nothing. I had never owned a computer that I bought new. I had a hand-me-down computer at one point in my life, but I barely even had – I don't even think I had a social media presence at the time. I knew nothing about computers, nothing about sound at all. All I knew was kind of what I wanted to say. And everything else I had to kind of build from there.
Fair enough. And it's one of those things that when I've talked to other podcasters, they are doing it in a way that's totally different than me. And there's so many different ways one can solve this riddle. What microphone do you use? How do you get it from the microphone into a recording? There's a lot of different steps in between. And I'm a fan of hardware, so I use a lot of hardware so that by the time I get to the recording, I don't have to do anything in post. But that's because I'm lazy.
Yeah, that would be nice. I have some weird obsession that each of my shows has to be exactly the same length. Now, that only holds true for Scathing Atheist. Eli and Heath won't let me do it on any of the other shows, but we're exactly 60 minutes long, and that requires, I guess you can do that in the real, in real time, but that requires some post-production unless you're going to be,
Yeah, I'm leaning towards that is a sign of psychosis, motherfucker, and that you have serious problems.
It's much closer to psychosis than marketing, yeah.
I don't know. I can be 40 minutes one week and 2 hours the next, and I don't care, and the listeners don't care. Matter of fact, I found out that as I upgraded equipment and made the sound better, I'm making these little tweaks that almost no one will ever hear. Now, some people do, but I would put out a thing on Facebook and saying, did you like the sound before or after this date? And people are like, that sounds good, dude. Because they have no idea.
Well, it's funny because, podcasters are much more likely to be audiophiles than podcast listeners,
Indeed.
Right? So I know a lot of podcasters for whom podcasting is just a hobby that allows them to buy a lot of cool sound equipment, right? Kind of gives them an excuse to do that. And then I also know a lot of people like myself that are pretty much minimalists when it comes to hardware and post-production and everything in terms of sound quality. But yeah, I think it's like you said. There's a lot of ways to solve the riddle. The question is, what are you going to have the most fun doing, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think for me, the goal was at the very beginning was to not suck. And so, listeners, there's some things that you can do, and you don't have to get a $700 microphone to start with. Matter of fact, buying a $700 microphone might increase the chances that your sound sucks because you don't know what to do with it. So, don't get carried away. And if you have questions, you can contact me. Can they contact you and ask questions?
Yeah, I get questions all the time. Although I will say I don't do great with hardware questions. If you want microphone recommendations, you're probably better off going to Phil.
Well, there you go. And what are you using right now for microphone?
I am using a Shure something or another. Actually, I'm talking to you through a Yeti Blue.
Yeti Blue. Okay.
But the one that I normally record from is a Shure microphone. It's a podium mic that I've been using for years.
Well, it's funny. It's probably the SM58, which is the standard basic microphone, iconic microphone that you think of when you say microphone. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. It is not an SM50. I know
Okay.
I know that one because that's what we use for our live shows.
Yeah.
But it's a very similar. It's a very similar microphone internally.
Fantastic. And when did the Scathing Atheist podcast begin?
That would have been January of 2014.
2014. So you've gone from nothing to this podcasting juggernaut in 4 years, huh?
Well, I don't know about juggernaut, but yes, it's been 4 years.
Now, your listeners, some of my listeners are going to know all of your shows, but in case I've got somebody new that doesn't even know about the Scathing Atheist, what other podcasts are you currently on, helping with, producing, etc.?
Well, we do 4 shows now. So the Scathing Atheist is myself, my partner Heath Enright's been there since day one. Eli Bosnick was a later addition, but no less valued for it. So it's the 3 of us that do Scathing Atheist. We also do a political show called The Skepticrat. We do a Christian movie review show called God Awful Movies. And our most recent baby is a show called Citation Needed. We teamed up with the 2 guys over on the Cognitive Dissonance podcast. And that's basically, it's a trivia show. We find just interesting nuggets of history that we talk about, and we just have a lot of fun. It's much more of a traditional podcast theme in the sense that it's a little bit more improvisational than our other shows. And it's a little more educational based, but there's no fewer dick jokes in that one. We have a good high minimum of dick jokes across the board.
Well, it's funny. I've told a few people something like, someone will ask about my podcast and like, what's it like? And I go, well, it's kind of like Scathing Atheist, but way less funny and virtually no dick jokes. And if their response is, then why would I listen to it? And I go, I guess you wouldn't. But that's, kind of a comparison.
You have to work on that marketing spiel. We're going to need to get you a better elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the 2 that I now use is someone will say what it's about. And depending on how provocative I want to be, I'll say 1/3 finance, 2/3 atheism. And sometimes people's eyes pop out of their head. And then the other one I'll say is I talk about politics, religion, and money, everything you should never discuss with your family. And they go, ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So we do that. And I just heard recently on the Scathing Atheist, because I did actually listen to a couple shows and prepping for this big interview. You are a Bigfoot denier. Is that fair to say?
I don't know if denier would be exactly the right way to say it. But
I was kind of hurt by that rant, man. It's
oh, were you? You big Bigfoot guy?
No, but it not only did you have the Bigfoot denialism, but a few weeks earlier, you were talking about Bigfoot's member. You seem to have a fixation with that.
Yeah, it's funny. We have the best fans in the world. Okay, so as I'm sure you may have discussed on your show, there was a Republican candidate. I believe he was the running mate of a Republican candidate in some southern state that no one gives a shit about. And it came out that he was a big author and proponent of Bigfoot porn. Real invitation to be on our show there.
Yeah,
if you're in a headline that involves Bigfoot porn, we're going to talk about you. So a couple of days later, we had a show. We had a live show in Chicago. We were doing a recording of Citation Needed, and one of our listeners actually brought me a nice selection of Bigfoot porn that he'd purchased on Amazon a few days before. So at the very least, I had my privacy on the plane ride home.
Yeah.
So,
wow, that's so when you say purchased porn on Amazon, I didn't know that was an option. Is it like
they're porn books? They're like the old school, like actual has a cover with pages in it books.
And is this like Christian fiction where it's self-complimentary, or were there actual photographs?
No, there's no photographs in it. They would be far too blurry, It would look like Asian crotches or something. It would be
because like a 14-inch long blur.
Yeah.
Huh.
No, but I actually, to be perfectly honest, hopefully the listener that gave it to me isn't listening, but I haven't actually read any of the Bigfoot porn, although it is prominently displayed on my bookshelves at home now.
Well, I think that's kind of like a book worthy of just owning, to have the knowledge that you own it.
Yeah, exactly. Like the other day I was going through a store and they had the old Atari ET game.
Yeah.
For sale. And I don't have an Atari, but I had to buy the game just because I didn't have it, right?
I can see that. That's like when magicians collect, 50-year-old books about magic tricks that everyone now knows how they're done, but they now have this 50-year-old book.
Right.
About magic. So you've got all these shows, and of course the movie reviews have gotten quite popular, have they not?
Yeah, we've, this seemed like a really good idea 3 years ago.
Yeah.
That every week we would sit down and watch a Christian movie because, like, it's fun, in the sort of like, how did this get made sense of, like, it's fun to make fun of bad stuff. But I don't think I could get myself excited about just going out and making fun of someone else's lack of accomplishments every week. But going out and sort of exposing what's actually being said in these Christian movies, what the messages that Christians are sending to themselves and to their children are, I feel like that actually serves a purpose in the atheist world. And like I said, 3 years ago, it seemed like I was the right guy for that. 158 Christian movies later, I'm not so sure about it, but know.
And it's one of those things you probably thought, okay, we'll go through the 5 or 6 movies that are out there, and then you are exposed to an entire world of hurt.
Yeah, well, so the God Awful Movies podcast actually started as a segment on the Scathing Atheist. When the first God's Not Dead movie came out, it was only a few weeks after we'd started.
Yeah.
Scathing Atheist. So my buddy Eli, who was not yet a part of the show, he'd guested on it once. I had him come on because he's just a really funny guy. But he came on, or he got in touch with me and he said, "Hey, I'd love to review this movie on your show." And I said, "That sounds like a great idea." He did it. It was one of the most popular segments we ever did. So I invited him back on. I was like, "Hey, there's another stupid Christian movie coming to the theaters. You want to go see it?" And so we ended up doing that 5 or 6 times before we eventually just split it off on as its own show and realized that it was there was actually enough material to handle 52 episodes a week of this.
Yeah, now I'm assuming at some point you did the contemporaneous Noah movie.
We never actually reviewed that on God Awful Movies. Me and Heath reviewed it on Cognitive Dissonance.
I see.
I think right before we started doing God Awful Movies. So we have done a review. I don't think Eli ever got involved in a review of that one, but yeah, I did see that one. I was a big Aronofsky fan before that, but
well, I think my favorite from that is spoilers, listeners, spoilers. That when Russell Crowe is chasing Hermione with a knife to stab the 2 infant daughters, that's movie gold right there. I mean, you can't top that. It's just unbelievable.
Well, that might be the high point in all of Christian movie history. That's a pretty low bar to clear.
Well, and of course the not so subtle fact that these two newborns were female, therefore in 12 years they were going to be eligible to be wives to the other sons of Noah, could be considered disturbing by some.
Yeah, I mean, but let's face it, there's really nothing in that story that shouldn't be considered disturbing by many.
Well, I was really surprised by the fact that they created kind of like from Dungeons and Dragons stonars out of angels. And they get rocks stuck to them like some kind of magnetic field of calcium deposits or something. I don't know how that works.
Just like in the Bible.
Yeah, just like in the Bible where these giant alien angels that fell to earth and are covered and surrounded in rocks make boats because that's what they do.
Well, what I love is that here's Aronofsky, and he's like, well, it's going to be pretty unrealistic if I have this one 900-year-old guy build this whole boat. How can I make this a little more believable? Rock monsters. The fucking rock biter from Neverending Story shows up and gives him a hand. Why the hell not? I expected the racing snail to show up next.
And the funny thing is that when the rock monster angels things get killed, they don't die. They get freed, and they get to go back to heaven. So it's kind of like a win-win. I mean, you do battle, and then when you die, you just whoosh, straight up to the sky. That was a pretty good trick.
Yeah.
So because they were banished down there for disobeying somebody. Did they give some guy fire or something? What did they get in trouble for?
I mean, in the Bible, they got in trouble for fucking human women.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, that's bad juju.
Yeah, I think that, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if Aronofsky. Like, it seems to me that it's odd Aronofsky wouldn't go into fucking human women if he had a chance to, right? If you've seen any of his other films, you would imagine that the angels would have had like Jennifer Connelly and some chick going ass to ass at some point. But he decided, for whatever reason, to be tasteful in his movie about religion and leave out that part.
That is weird. And he did at least have Noah being a complete lush at the end. That was a nice touch.
Yeah. Occasionally he stayed true to the source material.
Well, I think in the Bible, isn't it like 1 or 2 paragraphs, the entire Noah story?
It's more than that, but yeah, it's not much.
Yeah, it's not a whole lot to go on. You got to make something up to get a whole story out of that.
Yeah. I think it probably isn't more than like 9 or 10 paragraphs of the entire book.
Yeah, that's a pretty small section for a 1,000-page book.
Yeah.
Another thing that I know you are a big fan of is Donald Trump. Why don't you talk to me about him?
Oh, yeah. No, that's okay. So here's the problem with doing a podcast is that your thoughts are like recorded. You can go back and hear them. So now I can go back to the Skepticrat, which is our politics show, and I can hear how hopeful we used to sound and how silly the idea of a Trump president seemed to us at that point. Like, we were just like during the primaries, we were like, well, sure hope Trump wins so that there's no possibility in hell that the Republicans will take the White House this year. That just naive optimism is so hard to go back to now.
Yeah, it's weird because I just listened to a segment I did 3.5 years ago for a future show because I'm doing a best of because I'm going to be away from the studio. And I have a segment where I compared Trump's investment portfolio to the S&P 500 and how poorly he did. But I was surprised how actually awful I felt about Trump. And I think it's because he reminded me of a previous boss that I used to have that lied every day, always got away with his lies, would undermine people, get people fired, get people thrown out of the company, do whatever he wanted. If someone had a good idea, he'd steal it and say it was his, and he would just get away with it again and again and again. And he was an oversized blowhard like this with weird skin coloration. I don't know if it's genetic. And I hated this guy with a passion. So when Trump started to get any kind of fame, I always would think of this old former boss. And when he started getting in politics, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be that guy that is so ridiculously bad. No one thinks that he can win, but yet keeps succeeding because that's what he's done for the last 60 years of his life. Just by brute force and his own willpower convinces some people that he's good.
Well, I was going to say, and let's not give him too much credit, also by cheating on a level that no one else would, right? By going to a level that no one else would go to get himself an advantage, right? Whether or not that's laundering money from Russians or taking Oppo research from them. Whether that's obstructing justice or, it's funny you say that because the aforementioned toy company I worked for, the boss was very similar to Trump in management style, not in skin hue.
Yeah.
But he had the same management style. He was less incompetent than Trump, which isn't saying much, but he was radically incompetent. But he had that same management style of several different factions, everyone fighting for my attention, everyone against everyone, biting backs and shit. And that's what he thought worked, right? That was intentional. And I think that's what Trump believes as well, because that's worked for him in a family business where, let's face it, we're heavily invested in real estate and New York in the 70s and 80s. There's no way you don't have money now unless you're such a fucking idiot that you invested everything into a bunch of casinos, somehow managed to not make money as the house, and then had to launder Russian money to make up your bankrupt fortune.
And that is amazing to me, since I do talk about investments and money and often discourage people from gambling. How does one not make money in a casino?
You almost have to be trying, don't you?
I think one must make a serious effort to lose money owning a casino. I mean, there could be certain times in history where there's wars or riots or things overthrow, but in a stable democracy where you're pretty much granted permission to cheat from and steal from people through these games, how do you not make money? It's staggering.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the house always wins except when Trump's in charge of it.
Yeah, so that takes some doing. So, I just think, you relax and eat a Trump steak and follow it with some Trump vodka and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, or hang yourself with a Trump tie.
It's long enough your feet can reach the floor. You kick out the chair and you just, boom, you fall on the floor.
Yeah, right. Just standing there going, oh, shit, this is awkward.
That sucked. So, outside the box, let's say Trump gets kicked out of office tomorrow. Is Pence an improvement?
Boy, it's hard for me to say this, but yes.
I know. I'm at the point.
Yeah, right. I didn't say that at the beginning of the presidency. I said, look, give me the incompetent, inconsistent guy who has no real policy positions except for and over the avowed theocrat homophobe. But at this point, look, just predictability.
Yeah.
Is, just a predictably bad guy is better than an unpredictably bad guy.
I think I agree. Now, speaking of predictably bad guy, you had no idea I was going to do this, but you made the perfect segue. Let's talk about Catholic Church child rape.
Oh, let's.
I'm sure you are aware because I heard it on the show, and it's a topic that I must cover with you. In Philadelphia, some 300 priests, so not all of them, not all of them have been named. 300 priests. I mean, how many priests can there be in the state of Pennsylvania?
I think active right now it's something like 1,200. Now, I should say that's in the state of Pennsylvania. I don't mean to cut you off in your intro here, but this grand jury report was only from, I think, 6 of the 8 dioceses in Pennsylvania. The other 2, which are Philadelphia and Altoona, it's not that they didn't have child sex abuse. They just had different grand juries that looked into just those dioceses. So when you add the 60 or so named predator priests in the Philadelphia report and the 50 or so in the Altoona report, we actually have 410 identified predator priests, identified from documents that the Vatican and that the dioceses themselves had. Just in the state of Pennsylvania, that's about a quarter of the active priests. If they were all active at the same time, that would be about 1 in 4 active priests.
Yeah. So again, like I said, not all priests are bad, and I've had some pushback actually from atheists on my Facebook wall that I'm painting all priests with a broad brush, and I'm kind of like, well, if you don't like being painted by the same broad brush, don't stand on the same canvas, don't pal around with known pedophiles. It's real simple. I'm still waiting for one Catholic priest to step forward and say what we're doing to these kids is wrong and what the church is doing to cover it up is wrong. I'm imagining I'm going to be waiting a long time for that.
Well, so here's the thing, though. You look at those 400 priests just in Pennsylvania, and again, these are only the ones that they were able to identify from the documents provided to them by the archdiocese. Right? These are only the ones where they felt the need to keep track of it because one of the victims was making some noise about going to the press or suing them.
So these are the ones that got caught?
Yes.
Is it? So okay. That's deep. That's 1/4 got caught. Because as we know, whenever you do any criminal activity, you always get caught the first time.
Right. Well, yeah. And if you go into this report, which I spent the weekend reading all the way through this 900-page report produced by this grand jury. But as you go through the report, it becomes pretty damn clear that, nobody had just one victim.
Yeah.
Again, there are 1,000 over 1,000 known victims that some of them remain anonymous, but many of them are named in the report. 1,000 that they can identify, again, just through the documents that the Archdiocese was keeping.
And shared.
Yeah, well, right. Just the ones that they were able to subpoena. So what we're talking about, and if that was all the predator priests. Now, again, this is over a 70-year period. The 1,200 number I gave, that's the active number of priests right now. So it's not really, this report doesn't really show that 25% of priests at any given time are abusers. But it basically does show that, right? It's very close to that number.
Most priests have that job for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. These people, most of these cases that are detailed in the report are priests who started. They got their first indication this person was abusing children in the 80s, and he was still active until 2002, right? Until the Boston Globe broke this wide open.
Well, I can almost see some people in an office saying, "What documents should we give up, and how many priests and children can we identify that makes people think that they've dug into this deep enough and don't really go all the way in?" I mean, yeah, that's bizarre.
Right. And even if they actually gave us everything they had, right, even if this represents all of the bad seed predator priests that they had, 1/4 of the entire priesthood, the other 3/4, like the vast majority of them would have to know about this, right?
They had to.
Like there are some reports where, like, obviously they have detailed reports of the higher ups covering these things up, right? They have detailed reports of the archbishop sending things to Rome going like, yeah, we got this under control, and using euphemisms internally to describe child rape. But there are also a number of stories of victims who went to just some other priest and said, hey, I had a priest a few years ago that molested me. And then the priest that they went to would say, okay, don't tell me his name. Go pray for him, but don't tell me his name.
Yeah, 5 Hail Marys.
Yeah, right. Those guys are not being listed amongst the predators or amongst the people involved in the cover-up. But that was obviously the culture of the church for, some 30, 40, 50 years, that when you heard about stuff like this, you tried not to learn any details so you wouldn't have to lie about it later.
Well, I think that's a rational course of action for someone who doesn't give a shit.
Or who gives a shit more about protecting their church than
because it's all
the
about
lives of children.
It's the bigger picture. I mean, sure, the kids are raped, but they get to go to heaven, so they have to keep them in the church, and the church has to look good. And
that's wrong. I mean, the rape, like, that speeds up suicides and deaths from alcoholism and substance abuse and stuff. So they even get to heaven quicker if you really think about it.
Well, that is a bonus. That's nice. So we've got this going on in the Catholic Church, and that's all in the past, right? It's fixed now?
That's one of the most painful things to read in the report, that even this grand jury who spent 2 years hearing from one victim after another, seeing one document after another where, like, wow, the person that victimized that guy we heard from on Tuesday, they knew about it before they put him in the parish where he victimized that person. They could have stopped this and didn't. Even after that, the grand jury is bending over backwards to act like the Catholic Church has made progress when they themselves cannot point to a single substantive thing that the Catholic Church has done to improve this. Right? There have been improvements in the law. There have been improvements in public awareness. There have been reporters that hold the Catholic Church's feet to the fire. There have been grand juries impaneled to subpoena these documents and whatnot. But there's nothing that you can point to that the Catholic Church itself has done to improve this. And as a matter of fact, as recently as fucking 3 years ago, Pope Francis pulled an accused pedophile priest out of the Caribbean, brought him back to the Vatican, and refuses to extradite. Like, this is ongoing now and in public.
Yeah, I think the same thing happened in Australia, and people in Australia were pretty upset that there was a guy who pretty much was a known habitual dozens, if not hundreds of kids pedophile, and he went over and kind of hung out outside of Rome in a nice luxury because he retired there, and they couldn't get him. So we have all that going on, and of course there's old stories to pick on the Catholic Church where they have baby swapping, baby stealing, homes for kids where they die and they bury them in the cistern in the backyard. I mean, I think the only way to end this thing is that organization needs to be shut down. I
mean, it's amazing to me that, like, the worst things that the conspiracy theorists over at InfoWars can think of to accuse Hillary Clinton of is just being the Catholic Church.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's but here it is actually really happening. And I have now taken the position, and some people think I'm a little extreme with this, but if you still go to a Catholic church, if you donate money, in my eyes, you are now complicit, because there is no way as a mature adult that you don't know that this is going on and has been going on and will continue. You're self-deluded perhaps at best, but you are complicit by providing funding and support to this organization.
Absolutely. And if the Catholic Church wants to start to remove that stigma, how about they take the simple action that was recommended by this grand jury in Pennsylvania, also by the Australian Royal Commission into the abuse of, they had such a verbose title, there's no way I'm going to remember, but that commission that Australia impaneled to look into this thing under Cardinal Pell. Why don't they take their advice and stop forcing victims to sign non-disclosure agreements to get money? Right, like if you really want to move past this, let those victims speak.
Yeah, make it, the ultimate disinfectant, sunlight. Let's make it public. Let's find the priests that involved this. They should be unemployed and put in jail immediately.
Well, and I'll go one further, Phil. When you look at the politicians, look, there are a number of states that are trying to pass laws to remove the statute of limitations retroactively for child abuse. There's no reason in the world why child sexual abuse and rape should have a statute of limitations. And the only reason it exists now is because Catholic organizations have too much money invested in it not existing. So if you vote for a politician who stands against that, and they're in the Democratic and Republican Party, especially if you live in the Northeast, if you vote for one of those politicians and don't make it very fucking clear to that politician that you oppose that and that you will, that their seat is under threat if they don't support that legislation, you're complicit. At a certain point, the whole damn country is complicit in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if this was a conventional business or a restaurant where all the management knew, or most of the management knew, and a good third or a quarter of the management was involved in this, they would be in jail and they would be shut down. And it's not like the church can't impose penalties, because there are cases where you can find a story where a priest is caught on a beach with a woman having a date.
Yep.
And it's presumed that they have a relationship. What happens to that priest? They're thrown out. When a priest steals a couple of $1,000s from the church and it's documented, the church doesn't call in the government and have an audit. They don't hide it. They fire that guy and they throw him out. So it's about priorities. If you're caught sneaking around with a woman, you are caught taking a few $1,000s from the church, you're out. If that same strategy is not applied to child rape, they endorse it, clearly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they clearly have more issues with a consenting adult sexual relationship than a child rape.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I hate is when they talk about inappropriately touching a child. I'm sorry. We're past that. They're not inappropriately touching a child. They're raping children over and over and over. Some of them dozens and dozens of children over decades. It needs to end. It's real straightforward and simple, in my opinion.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up. One of the first things that the grand jury report points out in sort of their patterns of behavior section is exactly that, this excessive use of euphemisms rather than calling things child molestation, child rape, child abuse. They would say things like inappropriate touching or has boundary issues.
Oh. And of course, I'm sure you're aware of Bill Donahue.
Oh, the Archbishop of the Mordor Diocese. Yeah, I know him.
Yeah. For the listeners, Bill Donahue is a self-proclaimed mouthpiece, professional whiner for the Catholic Church. They don't officially endorse him, but he officially endorses himself. And he has said things like, it's the children that tempt the priests. And his new recent one is that without penetration, it's not actually rape.
Yep.
And
they have his ass on CNN saying that.
Yeah. And he gets a voice. It's just like when it drives me nuts when atheists put up a billboard and the local TV station goes out and takes a picture of the billboard. They might actually put 30 seconds on the air of someone who wasn't responsible for putting up the billboard. And then they say, now let's go talk to Father O'Flanagan about this billboard and what it means to the community. And he gets 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a bias in the media. Oh, I sound like a Republican there for a second. Ugh. But we can see it.
Yeah, no, actually, I was in the middle of writing a diatribe about exactly that subject when I paused to do this interview with you. That bias is so like the Attorney General for the state of Pennsylvania. The Pope puts out this boy, gee, it sure is hard to stop covering up child sex abuse. We're going to try harder next time, though. And the Attorney General in Pennsylvania sends out a press release saying, well, that was very helpful of the Pope. That was very heartfelt. He sure is doing a good job. The hell he is. Yeah. There are all these concrete things that all of these different commissions and grand juries have said, why don't you just do this? This would be the minimum you could do to show us that you actually give a shit and want to stop this problem. And they're not doing any of that. And
they're not going to. I mean, as long as the money keeps pouring in, and it's not like it's a new thing that the Catholic Church is about money. I a couple years ago had on Gerald Posner, who wrote a book called God's Bankers about the Vatican Bank. And that was a fascinating romp through history over the last 400 or 500 years about how the bank works and how it collects money. And they were the last bank in the world to agree to universal standards for clarity to prevent money laundering.
Were they?
Yeah,
I'm so not surprised. Yeah,
and it's so funny because what it took for this to happen was that people using ATMs in Italy could not get their money out of the Vatican Bank because the Italian government said, hey, you're too corrupt for us. That takes some doing. That your bank is not meeting the minimum standards that we have complied with.
Right. No, I remember a bunch of news stories at the time when they had to have that first audit, and they were just like, oh, where did all of those previously owned by Jewish portraits and paintings come from? Yeah. Oh, my goodness, all the Nazi gold. It must have been we must have swept it under that rug there and not noticed it for all these years.
And again, that's the stuff that you are aware of.
Right.
And I've had the luxury, and I would do it again. I've taken a tour of the Vatican, and the amount of art that they have collected, there's a euphemism for you, stolen from other countries around the world is truly staggering. That place is a treasure trove. I mean, it would be the giant X on a pirate's map. Look here for all the treasure, because there it is. But just the stuff that you can see that's on public display is absolutely stunning. I can only imagine what is not made public.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's exactly the reason why they're fighting so hard against those statute of limitations being removed. They've already paid out something like $4 billion in hush money and settlements over this shit. So, but there's, I think, something like $64 billion in assets still in that bank of theirs. So, yeah, there's a lot more they could be doing, but both, obviously, both in terms of prevention, but also in terms of trying to make right, trying to help the people, the victims, get the help that they need afterwards. There's a lot more they could be doing, but no, they're hiding the money in, perpetual cemetery maintenance funds and whatnot.
Yeah, I do happen to know many years ago I spent a couple years as a closeted atheist inside a Missouri Lutheran Synod Church, and found out that the amount of money that they collect that actually goes to charity, to benefiting people, to providing shoes and coats and money for a local food bank was less than 2% of everything they brought in.
Wow.
I mean, I think like a general 501c3, you have to at least pass through 15% of what you raise, like when they call you for the Policeman's Benevolence Fund, which, by the way, never give to those guys. It's all a scam. The most that ever gets through the cops is 15%. But churches don't even have to do that. Now, there are churches that give generous amounts of money, but a lot of them, especially the one that I was in, where it was in a town that was in a shrinking population, they were desperate to get every dollar to patch the roof, to replace the boiler, to upgrade the organ, to pay the minister all their wages. By the time they got done with all the bills, and this is without paying property tax, without paying taxes for roads, often without paying taxes on wages because the employees were called, so therefore they didn't have to pay Social Security or income taxes.
Right.
Even with all those gifts from us, the tax-paying citizens, they still had nothing left over to give to really poor people. It's just a horrible, horrific system. And the Catholic Church is one of them. And I've had people on that were Mormons and people on that were Jehovah's Witnesses that claim their organizations are just as bad. They just haven't got caught yet.
Well, and look, I mean, yeah, right. The Catholics just keep way better records of the kid rape than the other ones and whatnot. But the thing is that even in the internal messaging, they're not even pretending that money is for helping the poor anymore. Again, I watch a new Christian movie every week, and one of the tropes of Christian movies is, oh no, the church is in trouble. We got to raise money for the church. The church is never in trouble because, they bought too many shoes for poor children or were too extravagant with their soup kitchen, right? It's always the bills themselves of the church. Like keeping the church building looking pretty has been so internalized that a lot of people see that as the point, right? It's not even about the money that may or may not eventually go to charity.
Now, I'm going to take a breath. We're going to change subject because we could probably talk about that all day. From time to time, you guys do live appearances. What's coming up next? Where can people find you?
Well, the next live show that we've got planned is in London. That's going to be on October 6th. We're doing a live record of God Awful Movies. We haven't announced the movie yet, but we have decided what it's going to be, and I'm super, super excited about it. So, yeah, that's going to be our second show on that side of the Atlantic. Then we don't have any other shows officially announced. We're looking at something in January in the L.A. area, possibly, but we don't have anything officially announced after that.
And you guys have a Patreon, correct? And people can go there and throw in some money at you?
Yep. We encourage people to throw as much money at us as they want. If you're going to throw change, please wrap it in bills to soften it in case, just for safety's sake.
Yeah.
But you can go to patreon.com/Scathing Atheist or patreon.com/godawful or patreon.com/Skepticrat or patreon.com/Citation. Basically, there's a lot of ways to give us money, is what I'm saying.
I am so glad that there's a lot of ways to give you money. It's one of those things that I am delighted that people can now make money being atheists. Now, my scheme is a little different because I make money with financial advice, but I'm pitching to the atheist secular market, and no other financial planner in their right fucking mind is going to jump into my pool. And I actually welcome them to, and I've actually tried to refer people to other advisors, and when they find out where I'm getting all my clients from, they turn away the free money that I'm offering them.
Isn't that strange?
It's staggering, and I guess I'm not going to have any competition in this niche for the rest of my life. Maybe it'll change. Maybe it'll change soon, but I just don't see it. I don't know who's going to do it, but
well, the Catholic Church is hard at work, man. They're making atheists as quick as they can.
Well, they are, and of course, you probably are aware that the numbers are net negative if you exclude immigrants into the United States. They are shrinking at a very precipitous rate. And I also have a friend who is in the district level governance of the Anglican Church. Everything south of I-80 in Illinois, so basically not Chicagoland. And a good half of their congregations they expect to close in the next 5 to 10 years because there's nobody there. There's nobody going. There's no one to preach because they can't find ministers. They have no money, and the only money they have coming in is from people dying, and they're almost running out of those. So you can go to a church, and there's 20 people there in a room that can seat 600. They can't give enough money until they die.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I'd love to see that as a positive sign, we also have the religious equivalents of Patreon. So, there are new ways for them to reach their flocks that don't require them to have physical locations so they can fleece even more of the money. But look, the numbers are trending the right way, but God knows when the other side is just rapidly raping kids as fast as they can, it's really depressing that they're not moving a little quicker.
And what is it that the government just announced, a religious task force? Is that?
Yeah, to make sure that when religious people break the law, they don't get in trouble for it.
Yeah,
that's important.
Because if you're doing something that your religion allows and the law allows it, you don't have a problem.
Nope.
It's when your religion allows it and it's illegal that you have a problem.
Or vice versa, yeah.
Yeah. Well, even the vice versa is not too bad, but
well, that's what leads us into the discrimination, right? When your religion doesn't allow it, but the law requires it.
Yeah. anything that we haven't covered? I know that you have other things to do, and we both have offices that heat up, so we don't want to get too hot and bothered while we're getting hot and bothered. Any topics we haven't covered that you want to go over?
No, I think we pretty much, well, I mean, an infinite number we could talk about that I'd love to talk about, and a little deeper into all the subjects that we've covered would be nice, but no, I think we've covered quite a few.
Well, Noah, thank you for being on, and listeners, it's the Scathing Atheist is the one podcast, and of course, there's 3 others, and did I hear recently that you're going to go all 5 work days? Is that right?
No, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being on the Phil Ferguson Show. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite, man.
Fourth, for condemning my friend Stephen Fry for his nature, for saying you couldn't be a member of our church. You're born in sin. There's a revolting piece of casuistry that's sometimes offered on this point. Yeah, we hate the sin only. We love the sinner. Stephen is, I'm sorry to say, not quite like other girls. It's his nature. Actually, he is like other girls in that he's, when I last checked, absolutely boy mad. He's not being condemned for what he does, he's being condemned for what he is. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh, no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join our church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful, it's inhuman, it's obscene, and it comes from a clutch of hysterical, sinister virgins who've already betrayed their charge in the children of their own church. For shame, for shame.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Thank you again for listening. It's that time of the show to kind of wrap things up a little bit. One quick reminder, I am still promoting my drive to raise money for the Secular Student Alliance. They do a lot of good work. We had a student on a few weeks ago. It has affected the lives in a positive way for tens of thousands of students over the last couple decades. So I want you to think about donating some money. It doesn't have to be a lot, but, $5, $20, $100 a month, whatever you can afford, give until it feels good. That's what I want you to do. And here's the deal. And one of the reasons I'm so excited to promote this is that I'm going to do a match. So you can cost me money. Your money gets to work twice as hard and you cost me some money. So this is what I do. Part of skeptical investing, Polaris Financial Planning, and what I do is to give back 10% of my gross revenue to the movement. And this is one of those ways. And I could use your help a little bit here. So here's the link. You want to go to bit.ly/Phil matches, PHIL, and it's a capital P, by the way, matches, MATCHES. I would have never chosen this myself because it's so hard to hear. At least I think it is. But bit.ly/Phil matches, capital P, capital M. I think you need both of them. It's very technical. Again, I'll ask you if you can make it work any other way. Let me know. It'd be nice to know, but I have not been able to make it work any other way than the capital P and the capital M in Phil Matches. bit.ly Phil Matches. It's going to take you to a page on the Secular Student Alliance website where you can sign up and donate a monthly contribution. So if you give $10 a month, that will be $10 in 1 month. In a year, that would be $120. What I'm going to do is take the entire 12 months. So if you give $10 a month, $120 will count towards the match. And I will match personally, Polaris will match, up to $10,000. So please go give money there. And if you give $500 per month, of course, that's $6,000. That's a big deal. So keep that in mind. I know some of you can swing it because some of you are my clients. So consider doing that. It's the right thing to do. It's a nice thing to do. Go give money to the Secular Student Alliance. I don't have any reviews to read, so I'm terribly sad. If you'd like to leave a review, of course, the only places I know are iTunes and Stitcher. You can go leave reviews there, and I'll try to read them. For the next couple of weeks, I am taking a break from producing new content. However, I have made two, hear that, one, two, best of shows. I'm going to space them out a little bit so you won't miss me completely, but you may notice it's not anywhere close to a week, maybe 10, 12, 14 days between shows. But I have two best of shows, and the interviews are Ellery Shemp talking about legal battles and why schools can't have Bible readings. And another one is about the Vatican Bank and some other stuff about that Trump and the S&P 500 and other skeptical topics that we've talked about in the past. So I'm going to do two best of shows to give myself a little time away from the show. And then I'm going to come back from a conference and I have a new toy. Hopefully I can record some interviews at this conference, and I'll tell you all about it when I get back. So hopefully you're going to enjoy that. And of course, I've got more interviews scheduled when I come back. It's going to be great fun to continue. Hopefully you enjoy everything. And then in late October, early November, I will be going to the CFI conference, SciCon, in Las Vegas. And then 2 weeks later, I will be at the FFRF conference in San Francisco. So hopefully I get to see you at one of those conventions. If you do see me, please feel free to come up and say hello. Until then, ciao.